Welcome to our OB3 live Q&A. I'm Jessica Stonish. I'm Director of Growth Marketing at Portico, and I'm going to be emceeing today. Let's move on to the presenters. We'll go ahead and start with Sarah, if you want to introduce yourselves.
Hi, thanks, Jessica. I'm so glad everybody could join us today. I'm Sarah Scott. I'm the FA Compliance Specialist here at Portico.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Armando Rios, Director of Financial Processing.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kimberly Verga. I'm the Senior VP of Financial Aid.
Great. First, I think Kim is taking this one, just doing OB3 at a glance.
Sure. Before we dive into what today's topic is or what we want to go over, we did want to kind of give just an at a glance the changes, what was prior to OB3 and the framework after OB3. This should not be new to anybody on this call, but we did want to create just a quick, basically a cheat sheet. Based on the questions submitted in advance, we had the majority of the questions focused on the schedule reduction of units, I guess, and SOR. So we're going to spend most of today's session addressing those scenarios. One thing I do want to note is that a lot of the questions that you submitted are questions that we actually have submitted ourselves to the Department of Ed, and we are still waiting on clarification. So we want everyone to know that in the meantime, we're going to leverage the information that was shared with us during the FSA office hours. And then in addition to that, NASFA, those are our two resources. So just to kind of go over, recap, basically the changes for OB3, the major changes for OB3, the Pell and the institutional aid. In the past, Pell could be awarded even if the student had institutional state grants, even if it covered most or all of the COA. Now the change is if Pell would be excluded if those non-federal grants equal or exceed the COA. As far as enrollment intensity, SOR, it's the life that we're living right now, hence this webinar. Students that are enrolled at least half-time, generally in the past, would be able to get full annual loan limits, and now they're going to be prorated based on enrollment intensity. And enrollment intensity meaning part-time, full-time, three-quarter time. Then there was some changes to the graduate program. So in the past, direct unsub, and you could also get Grad PLUS up to the COA. Now the change is it's direct unsub only, and then there's no Grad PLUS for new borrowers. That's a big change. As far as Parent Plus loans, originally in the past, it would be available up to full COA, and now it's going to be capped at $20,000 annually and $65,000 per dependent students, and that's all parents combined. So that's a big change. As far as graduate and professional loan caps, so in the past, there would be practical borrowing. It would be limited only to COA due to Grad PLUS availability, and now there's going to be annual and aggregate caps limit that totals federal borrowing. So that's a big change. And I don't know if everyone's staying up to date with all the EAs that are coming out around that zip code and defining the difference between the master program and the professional zip codes for the professional programs. There has been some changes recently, I think in the last week or so, around the master programs for nursing. So just be mindful of that. We've already made the changes. If you're a client of Portico, we've already made those changes on the back end. It was in benefit for those students in those programs. So just pay attention to those EAs. There was a lot of changes for repayment options. In the past, you had multiple IDR plans, and now it's been streamlined to basically just one or two options. Workforce Pell, I think this is one of the positives. One of the biggest positives that came out of OB3 is that, and just to put a caveat, you have to have the program approved by your state and accrediting to offer Workforce Pell. But one of the changes is that those shorter programs, particularly around clock hour, that were not Pell eligible will now be Pell eligible. But again, you have to go through the approval process. So I think that's a plus. In addition to that, if a student has a bachelor's degree in the past, the student wouldn't have been eligible for Pell, and that's been opened up. So I think those two options for students is a positive. And then there's some accountability metrics. And then there's also the federal aid for COA financing tool. And I will turn it back over to you, Jessica.
Great, thank you. I see that we have some people, we are in the chat, we have some people in the waiting room. That setting has been like removed from my view. So I'm working on letting people, anyone in the waiting room in. We'll keep going with the presentation while I work on that. So moving on, we're going to start with SOR. So the first question that we had come in is if a student is in grade level 1 at the start of fall spring, but then progresses to grade level 2 in the spring, how should the schedule of reductions be calculated?
All right, so we've had a lot of questions come in with this scenario, and there's been a lot of back and forth following external guidelines. And so we are currently reporting based on the latest and greatest that if we're using subsidized loans as the example, so a student is in a grade level 1, the annual loan limit, of course, is $3,500. For a standard fall spring academic year, that is typically awarded as $1,750 in the fall and $1,750 in the spring when the student is enrolled full-time in both terms. If the student receives $1,750 subsidized in fall as a grade level 1 student, then progresses to grade level 2 before spring, the applicable subsidized annual loan limit increases to $4,500. Since the student already received $1,750 in the fall, the remaining subsidized eligibility for spring may be $2,750 available for spring. So I have a small graphic, and I'll drop that nugget into the chat.
Great, thanks, Armando. All right, moving on to question 2, was asking if we could provide an example of a student attending less than a full-time in a program that has an optional header term.
Thanks, Jessica. So we've had a lot of questions around the header trailer situation. So we wanted to help you guys realize that the key takeaway here is that optional header or trailer term, the credits for that term should not be included in the denominator when you're calculating the SOR. You will only include the credit hours that are being attended for that optional term in the numerator. If that header or trailer is required, you would include the credits from that term in both the numerator and denominator. So that's the operation you need to consider. Is it a required term or not? In this particular slide example that we gave you, notice that the students attending less than full-time in all 4 terms, the summer, which is not a required term, as well as the fall, winter, spring terms. So the enrollment totals of 6, 7, 9, and 11 are included in that 33 total credits in the numerator. But notice that the denominator only includes the full-time definition of those 3 required terms, fall, winter, and spring. So the denominator is only 36. It would not be 48. So then when we calculate that total SOR percentage for this particular student, it's 33 over 36, which rounds to 92%.
Great, thank you so much. Moving on, do SOR calculations need to be determined before or after an R2T4 calculation?
Yeah, so the key takeaway here is in all of the communications that we've received from the Department of Ed or heard from the Department of Ed in multiple sessions is that the SOR should be done at the disbursement level, right? So at the time in which you're going to disperse, you should be adjusting that SOR for that specific disbursement. So when you're talking about R2T4, it really should be happening prior to the R2T4 calculation. There could be, because we always have them, rare scenarios, where it may have happened right around the ad drop period. I can't think of a scenario, but again, we're in financial aid, so we know that that happens. Then you want to make sure that you do your SOR, and that's the amount, that eligibility is the amount that's actually in the R2T4 calculation.
Great, thank you. All right, up next, how should SOR factor in for less than half-time attendance?
So SOR should not be used to create loan eligibility for a term in which the student is less than half-time. However, if the student's less than half-time enrollment is known when the school is determining eligibility for the academic year, those credits may still be included in the academic year enrollment calculation for purposes of determining the student's overall SOR's percentage. In other words, the credits may affect the student's academic year SOR calculation, but they do not create loan eligibility for the less than half-time term itself.
Great, thank you. If we originate a loan for one term at a time, what is the SOR calculation?
So the point to remember here is that the single term loan calculation for the schedule of reductions, when the student is not completing a remaining period of study or graduating, that single term would be based on the credits in the term, not the credits in the academic year. So we need to separate out, just like we did earlier with conditions, is the single term to complete a program, or is it simply because the student chose to attend a single term for various reasons? Maybe they transferred in. So this slide shows what the department has provided as far as that single term calculation. If we're working with a sophomore student who's attending 8 credits in the fall term in a quarter credit program, and of course, as usual, 12 credits per term is full time, they would have their sub calculated this way. So step 1, you would determine the proportion of the academic year that fall term represents. In this example that we're using, we're going to use a quarter credit program term. So that is 1/3 of the academic year. So 1/3 of a $4,500 sub grade level 2 loan would be $1,500. So $1,500 is your starting point. Then step 2 is determining the SOR total percentage. If the student is attending 8 credits and 12 credits is full-time for the term, remember for the term, then we have a percentage of 66.6, and of course rounded up to 67%. So now we have our SOR total and we have our starting point of 1,500. Step 3 is to apply that formula. So 1,500 times 67% is $1,005 sub for that fall term.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Up next, how should SOR be calculated if student is in an overlapping academic year situation?
So me again, this is really recent information, and I know all of you are probably frustrated just like we are. The information seems to be changing on a daily basis. We're having to go out and look at this information from the resources we can get it from, which right now tends to be NASPA. There's also the office hours that FSA is putting out, but of course, none of that's in writing. It's all word of mouth. So we're all struggling just with you guys as well. So because we haven't received anything in writing in this particular scenario, it's presumed. We are still waiting on final guidance on this, but this is the knowledge that we have right now. So we've given a straightforward example of a student who is attending school A in the fall. And while attending school A as a freshman in fall at the prior school, they received $1,750 sub and $3,000 unsub. Then they stop attending school A and they transfer to your school B. And we have to complete that overlapping academic year. So as a freshman, the student would have a remaining eligibility. 3,500 minus 1,750 sub is 1,750 sub. As well with unsub as an independent student, they would have $3,000 left. to borrow in that spring term. That's normally, prior to OB3, what we would be awarding that student in the spring term because that is what they have left. However, now because of OB3 and the SOR calculations, if this student is attending less than full time in that spring term, we now have to apply the spring SOR, the single term SOR to this spring term. So in this example we gave, it's the students attending 6 credits. So they're going half time, 50%. So we would then apply that 50% to their remaining eligibility. If it's sub 1750, we apply that and it's 875. 3,000 for unsub is left. We apply the 50% reduction and they get $1,500 in unsub. So that is what they could receive in spring at your institution, School B. We recognize this is a very easy, straightforward example, and most overlapping academic years are much more problematic than this, but hopefully it gives you a good idea of where you need to start with the calculation and then how to proceed depending on your student situation.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Next up, how should SOR be calculated if a student is in a quarter credit BBAY program?
Right, you're stuck with me again. Okay, so for a BBAY or a BBAY quarter credit program, I've gotten a lot of questions. We noticed at NASA that many attendees had questions about how do we handle a quarter credit BBAY versus your typical fall, spring, SAY terms. Really, when you step back and you simply apply the formula, it's not any more complicated than your normal fall, spring scenario would be. You're just recognizing that your denominator is changing. So if the program is defined as full-time 36 core credit hours, that's the number you use as the denominator. So, and of course, the disbursements would then be spread either equally or across all 3 terms in your proportional distribution method, depending on what you choose to do, across 3 terms instead of 2 terms. So in this example, we provided the students attending a total of 28 credits over the course of the terms here, and therefore the SOR percentage would be 28 over 36, which gives you a percentage of 78% for your SOR total, and you would then apply that to your total grade level limits, whatever you're dealing with your particular student, and that would provide you with the final SOR calculations.
Great, thank you. Next up, can we receive a guide on how Portico FA CORE is calculating the SOR?
So the answer is yes. Product is working through, it'll be released through our core release notes. And I don't know if you guys are aware, but when you're on your workflow page, so the red, yellow, green, there's actually a hyperlink on the top right-hand corner under announcements. So if you click on that, it'll bring us to all of the release notes. I know that product is working on that because in addition to providing the release notes, we also want to provide some best practices on how to use the funding estimate. So as soon as that's released, it'll be in that hyperlink.
Great, thank you. Next up, if a student is attending the fall and winter terms as full-time, but the spring term is LTFT, must we pay equal disbursement starting in fall?
All right, I'll take that one. So for quarter credit BBAY program, the SOR uses the same general logic as a semester program, but the numerators and denominators change based on that structure. So if a BBAY academic year is defined as 36 quarter credit hours, then 36 quarter credit is used as the academic year denominator when determining the student's annual enrollment percentage. Good thing to note that the school determines whether to allocate the annual loan limit evenly across the payment periods or by using a proportional distribution method, as long as the method is allowable for the program and loan period structure. The selected method should be documented and applied consistently two similarly situated students.
Great, thanks, Armando. Next up, will the Portico FA system automatically prorate a student using the schedule of reductions requirements for the 26-27 award year for undergraduate and graduate direct loans?
So the answer is yes. The system's going to automatically calculate the SOR for any student that's not attending full-time the following business day after the institution's published add drop period. So for our current clients, you should have already received an MS form to complete for your add drop period, because we're preparing to add that information into the field specific around this enhancement, this feature. And product has told us that it is going to be released in Q3. So I know what you're already thinking. You're saying, yeah, but I have students now. So the best course of action for students that you need to adjust now is two ways. You can either submit a new funding estimate, which would go through the review process and we would update the aid, or you can update it directly within the disbursement batch. Once the enhancement is released, then what will happen is it will automatically update after that add drop period. The biggest takeaway from this is that the SOR calculation is going to be driven off of the schedule units fields in the student detail page. So if you've been a client with us for a significant amount of time, it was conceptually the same process that we did for the enrollment intensity for the Pell. It's going to be similar to the loans. So we want to make sure, especially for the clients that we don't have an integration with, and that you may be updating the students one by one, or if you're using the import template, you want to make sure that those schedule units are accurate. And then the system will automatically update it.
Great, thank you. Next up, what should a college do to handle student populations that continuously change their enrollment?
All right. Institutions should carefully review their enrollment and financial aid policies in light of SOR requirements. So the key question is whether continuous enrollment changes truly serve students well, while also supporting accurate and timely administration. If the answer is no, you should consider revising policies and streamlining add drop periods in a way that better supports students, institutional funding, and Title IV compliance. If the answer is yes, then you should take a serious look at whether your systems can support that model effectively. So there's some questions that you should be asking yourselves. Does the system provide timely and reliable alerts when enrollment changes occur? Does systems automatically recalculate aid when enrollment changes affect eligibility? Ours does. Can the system accurately apply required adjustments under SOR and other Title IV rules? And can you easily identify which students need review before disbursements? I think we've said this, in months past, and I've had some communication with schools, but definitely looking forward, you want to make sure that you're monitoring your stats reporting, automations on your end, and most importantly, communication between departments. Enrollment changes, add drop activity, recalculations, account adjustments, and student communications must all work together. It's critical going forward. And if you haven't done so already, then you're late to the game. And, this can cause a trickle down effect and can also cause a snowball effect for our students. So for 26, 27 and forward, trying to manage frequent enrollment changes and SOR adjustments manually is not a sustainable compliance solution. Institutions that allow ongoing enrollment changes need clear policies, reliable reporting, strong automation, and consistent communication workflows to identify those changes quickly, recalculate eligibility accurately, and document the resulting adjustments.
Great, thanks, Armando. Next, Can a student enrolled in a single semester term receive more than half of their full-time annual loan limit?
So this has been a huge question, I think, for you guys and for us as well here at Portico. We feel like we're finally coming out of the black hole of this question, even though we do still have it posed to the FSA questions email. So we are awaiting something in writing, but we do feel like from listening to office hours as well as some NASPA information that we received at the conference, we do feel like this is the final answer, but as usual, this could change. But at the moment, this is how we are operating. So if the student is receiving a single term loan and they're not graduating, again, not graduating, then the single term SOR calculation is used, just like we already discussed in slide 16. And when you guys get this presentation that we are going to email out later, you can refer back to that if you need to. Because that formula starts with the reduced proportional amount, so a half for a semester term or a third of the academic year for a quarter term, it can never exceed the amount of that beginning formula. Even if they're attending more than full-time during that single term, they will be restricted and limited to that proportional amount. However, it depends, right? So if the student's attending a single term in order to complete a remaining period of study, excuse me, if they're graduating, right? So then the SOR formula does apply, or excuse me, let me get this right. If they're graduating, the SOR formula does not apply. We would then revert back to that existing remaining period of study proration formula that we are all used to, we all know and love. It reverts to that, and then we're calculating the credits in the remaining period of study divided by the credits in the full-time academic year. So let's look at what this looks like. On the left-hand side of this slide, you will see a student. They are not graduating. Perhaps they have transferred into the program, whatever has happened. So even though they're attending more than full-time, they're attending 13 credits, 12 being the standard, the definition of full-time, they're still restricted to that half of the academic year total. So 2250 is the starting point, and therefore they cannot exceed 100%. So the ending point is still 2250. On the right-hand side, we have a student in a slightly different circumstance. They're attending a single term, but they're graduating. They only need the fall term 13 credits to complete their program. Because they're graduating, the SOR single term calculation is not in play. It now reverts to the remaining period of study proration, and we would apply the credits they're attending, which is 13, over their academic year full-time definition, which is 24. So then we would apply our total sublimit of 4,500 as a sophomore student to that proration. 4,500 times 13 over 24 equals 2438. Same thing for unsub, equals 3250. So again, we're going back to what situation is your student in? Are they taking a single term for another reason besides graduation? Or are they graduating? That is what will tell you what you need to do in this scenario. I also want to point out the rounding, because a lot of us sometimes get caught up in the rounding. On the left, the SOR formula requires rounding at the point of calculating their percentage. So if you're getting a partial percentage, you would need to round it to the nearest whole percentage to arrive at your SOR percentage. On the right-hand side, our existing formula does not require that we round it. You can choose to do, some schools do choose to round it. They would need to do that consistently, but most of our clients do not choose to do it that way. And the funding estimate will also, it's not written to round. Again, schools can choose to do that. You can communicate that to us. That is perfectly acceptable and within regulations. But normally it is not rounded. It is kept at the decimal. So that's why the numbers are going to be slightly different. Even if this was a lower percentage, whatever the case, this is not rounded and this on the left is.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. So these are some references that we use. I don't know if anyone wants to speak to them or if we want to just share them. And then these will I'll also include when we send out the email after the event, we'll include links to all of these references.
Yeah, I can speak to it a little bit, Jessica. So yeah, NASFA has been a big touch point for us, and I'm sure for you institutions it is as well for you. They've been pretty timely about getting information out and making it digestible. So we use a lot of NASFA links here. One of the FSA, well, not one, a couple of the FSA options that we do have available is the fourth down, which is the webinar that was specifically about SOR and loan limits. Some of these scenarios are covered. They did not dive very deeply into these edge cases, but there is that available for you, as well as the FSA FAQs. Those will be more beneficial if you have questions about legacy, or if you have questions about loan limits. They have not yet released the FSA FAQ about schedule of reductions, which I feel like is what most of us are getting hung up with, that we need the answers for. They haven't provided that yet, but hopefully that's coming soon. And then, of course, if you have access to NASFA, a good place to start is their Ask Regs with the OBBBA condition, not condition, but category that you can look at. And it contains all of these articles that we've referenced, which is only a couple. They have probably near 100 different articles that you can look at that give you more guidance and detail. And if NASFA doesn't know the answer, they will tell you that as well. We're waiting on confirmation from FSA.
Great. Thank you. Last but not least, Portico is here to support you in all of your financial aid needs. So do you need consultation? Do you need managed services? Are you realizing, oh no, my software is not automatically doing all these calculations for me and it's not up to date, it's not ready for OB3? You know, the Portico team and the Portico software, we've been processing aid for months under the new OB3 guidelines. So reach out to us anytime. We're here to support you. And that's it. Thank you again to our presenters, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Bye.
Thank you.